Thanks for being here. Tonight we're pulling 4chan posts that are dark and genuinely disturbing. The kind people wish they'd never read. Hit like, subscribe, turn it up, and let's begin. The dog came in at almost 11 at night. August, Nashville, the kind of summer where the AC in the clinic runs constantly and still can't beat back the humidity clinging to the front doors. I was closing up. Tuesday, one tech left on the schedule, the lobby empty. Half the city was still weird about coming inside anywhere in 2020, and after 10, most walk-ins were emergencies from people who'd waited too long. I'd been doing this 12 years. You learn to read the door before it opens. A young guy walked in carrying a pit mix in a blanket. Maybe 25, clean t-shirt, khaki shorts, sandals, not panicked. That was the first thing I noticed. When someone brings you a badly hurt animal, they're usually a mess, hands shaking, voice climbing. He wasn't any of that. He walked up to the counter and said, "She got hit by a car, she's bleeding." The dog was maybe 40 pounds. Brindle. Her name, he said, was Josie. She wasn't moving much, but her eyes tracked me when I lifted the blanket. Alert. That's usually a good sign. It also meant she'd been alert for whatever happened to her. I took her back to the surgical prep room and told him to wait in the lobby. He sat down in the chair by the window and pulled out his phone. 12 years. You get to know what a car does to a dog. The impact side has road rash, usually the flank or the hip. You get abrasions from the asphalt, sometimes a lodged tooth in the lip from the initial hit, broken ribs on the impact side that fan out in a pattern. Cars are big and dumb. They hit in a wide area. Josie didn't have any of that. She had 3 broken ribs on the right side, but they were clustered tight, like a fist would cluster them. She had a fractured jaw, hairline, on the left. Not the right, the left, the opposite side from the ribs. Her right rear leg was dislocated at the hip. There was no road rash anywhere on her. Her paws were clean, her nails weren't split. A dog that gets hit and drags across pavement splits her nails. Josie's were fine, filed down like she'd been walked on concrete recently. The worst part was her left ear. It had a healing tear in it, maybe 2 weeks old, that had gone through the cartilage and been left to close up on its own. Nobody had brought her in for that either. I stood there for a second with my hand on her side, feeling her breathe, shallow, fast, but steady. The tech, Raina, came in. She's a good tech. She saw my face and said, "What?" I said, "Get her prepped. I need a minute." I went out to the lobby. The guy was still on his phone, scrolling, not calling anyone, not looking up when the door opened, just scrolling. "She's in bad shape," I told him. "I'm going to need to operate tonight." "Okay. You said a car hit her. What street?" He looked up, not startled, just looking up. "Charlotte Pike, down by the gas station." "Was she off leash?" "She got out." "Anybody see it?" "No." I nodded, told him the estimate. He said fine, he had a card. He signed the consent form without reading it. His signature was small and neat. The name he wrote didn't look like a signature you use often. That could mean anything. I told myself that could mean anything. Then I went back to surgery. I've operated on a lot of dogs. Somewhere over the years, it becomes the calmest place in your day, the moment when it's just you and the tissue and the numbers on the monitor. Josie's heart was strong. Whoever she was, whatever her life had been, her body wanted to keep going. I set the hip. I pinned 2 of the ribs. The jaw would wire itself back with time. I cleaned the ear. An hour and a half in, Raina went out to check on the owner and came back. She stood at the door of the surgical suite for a second before she said anything. "He wants to know how long." "Another hour." She didn't leave right away. She said, "He asked me if the surgery would fix her behavior." I looked up from the drape. "What did you say?" I said I didn't understand the question. What did he say to that? He said she wouldn't listen. She never listened. He said it kind of normal, like he was telling me she chewed a shoe. I told her thanks, and to go tell him another hour. I finished the surgery. I don't remember most of the second hour, honestly. My hands did the work, and my head was somewhere in the parking lot with him. I've thought a lot about the difference between someone who loses their temper and someone who doesn't have one to lose. A person who hurts an animal and then panics and lies about it is still, in some corner of them, ashamed. You can hear it in the story. The lie is padded and apologetic. His wasn't. His was a receipt. Charlotte Pike, down by the gas station. She got out, card on file. When I came out of surgery, it was almost 2 in the morning. He was asleep in the lobby chair, actually asleep, head against the window, mouth open a little. I stood there and watched him for maybe 10 seconds. The AC vent above him was hissing. There was a moth on the inside of the glass behind his head. I woke him up and told him she'd made it. He said, "Good," I said. "I'm going to need to keep her here for post-operative observation, at least a week. Given the extent of the injuries and the risk of complications, I can't release her earlier. Clinic policy in trauma cases." None of that was clinic policy. We send them home the next day when we can. He said, "How much extra?" I told him a number. It was low. I wanted him to say yes. He said, "Okay." He didn't ask when he could visit. He didn't ask if he could call for updates. He signed another form and left. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not what he said in the lobby, not what he said to Reina. The part where he didn't ask a single question about seeing her again. I wrote in her chart that the patient was being retained for rehabilitation per medical necessity. I underlined per medical necessity. I dated it and signed it. If he'd ever come back with a lawyer, that line was the whole fence I had. He didn't come back. I called the number on the form 3 days later, told him she was recovering but needed continued care. He said, "Okay." I called again on day 6 and said we recommended long-term rehab placement and asked if he'd be willing to sign a surrender. He said, "Yeah, that's fine. Just email it." I emailed it. He signed it within 20 minutes. Small, neat signature. That was the part that stayed with me the longest, not the injuries. The 20 minutes. I took Josie home the following Sunday. She limped for about a month. She flinched at raised hands for longer than that. She's fine now, mostly. She sleeps on the left side of the bed and eats too fast, and is afraid of the sound of car keys, which is a thing I've learned to work around. I don't know what happened in that house before Charlotte Pike. I have guesses. I stopped letting myself walk through them after a while, because there's no bottom to that kind of guessing, and I had a dog to feed. For a few months after, I'd think about him at odd times, pumping gas, waiting at a light, not scared, not angry exactly. Just aware that somewhere in the same city was a person who could talk about a living thing in that tone, with a card on file, and then fall asleep in a lobby chair while she was under anesthesia in the next room. He's still out there. He probably has another dog by now. I hope he doesn't, but I know how these things go. Most of my job is signing off on things. That's what nobody tells you when you get into fraud investigation for life insurance. You picture the movie version, some guy sweating in an interview room. Real life is a queue of files, and 98% of them are just paperwork. You verify, you release, you move on. The claim came in the second week of January 2022. Widow in Reno. Husband, 51, dead of a heart attack in his sleep. Policy paid out at $400,000. Nothing about it looked odd. The death certificate was clean, the doctor who signed it had a good record, and the policy was 2 years old, which is well past the contestable window. My supervisor flagged it only because the amount was over our auto-approved threshold. The widow was named Alina. On the phone, she was tired, polite, a little short. She said she wanted the check released so she could pay off the mortgage on the house they'd bought when they got married. She asked me twice how long it would take. I told her a few days. She thanked me, and that was that. I would have signed off that afternoon. But our new system flags every incoming claimant against the shared industry death benefit database. It's a soft check. It doesn't tell you anything conclusive, just whether the name has been paid out before. Most of the time, you see a spouse who got a small policy on a parent 20 years ago. Her name came back with 3 prior payouts. I remember I laughed a little, because it had to be a different Alina. Different date of birth, different SSN, something. I pulled the records. Same date of birth, same social, same middle initial. First husband, 2010, Ohio. He fell down the stairs in their rental. Blunt force trauma. She got $200,000 from a policy she'd taken out about 10 months before he died. Second husband, 2014, Florida. Boating accident on the Intracoastal. Drowning. She got $350 from one carrier and a smaller supplemental from another. Third husband, 2018, New Mexico. A single car crash on a stretch of highway outside Las Cruces. He went off an embankment. Toxicology showed a normal blood alcohol for a guy who'd had 2 beers with dinner. Payout was $500, split between a term policy and a mortgage rider. And now the fourth, Nevada, heart in his sleep at 51. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time with the printouts fanned out under the overhead light. It was still snowing outside, the kind of dry Denver snow that ticks against the window instead of tapping. I remember the sound because I remember everything I wasn't looking at while I read those files. 4 different states, 4 different insurers, 4 different causes of death. Not one of them, on its own, would raise a flag. The Ohio adjuster had done his job. The Florida guy had done his job. New Mexico too. Nobody had done anything wrong. That was the horrifying part. Each of them saw one claim. Each of them saw grief on a phone call and paperwork that checked out. None of them had any way to see the other 3. Except I could. I went back through everything twice that night. I looked for cause. That's what you're trained to look for. Fingerprints of intent. Was there a life insurance policy taken out unusually close to the death? Was the coverage disproportionate to the couple's income? Was there any indication of a scheme? There wasn't. Not the kind you can prove. In each case, the policy was old enough to look natural. In each case, the death was ambiguous enough to require no investigation. The Ohio staircase had no witnesses. The Florida boat had no witnesses. The New Mexico car had no witnesses. And a husband dying in his sleep never has witnesses. That's the whole point of dying in your sleep. I didn't sleep much that week. I ran her through everything I had access to. She had lived in 6 states. She changed her legal last name each time she married and never kept an old one. She had no children. She had no criminal record, not a parking ticket. She had a real estate license she'd renewed in 3 different states without a lapse. On paper, she was a middle-aged widow who kept having the worst luck in America. I brought it to my supervisor on a Monday. He read the summary I'd built, and his face did a thing I hadn't seen before. He said, "Sit down." Then he said, "You cannot pay this." We didn't pay it. I drafted a denial on the grounds of pending investigation, which is legally thin but buys time, and I built a package for the Industry Anti-Fraud Consortium. That's a shared body across carriers that can look at things no single company is allowed to look at. I sent the whole file, all 4 husbands, all 4 states, all the timelines. They came back within a day and said they were opening a review. They asked me not to contact her. I didn't contact her. I did what they said. I went back to my other files. 2 weeks passed, 3. In the 4th week, I was running a routine name check on a totally unrelated claim, and out of habit, I typed hers in again to see if the flag had been updated. There was a new entry, a new policy, not a death, a policy issuance. Term life, $1.2 million, issued in Arizona. The policyholder wasn't her. The insured wasn't her. She was listed as the sole beneficiary. The insured was a man named Grant, 59, retired contractor, address in Scottsdale. The policy had been written 8 days earlier. I pulled county marriage records for Maricopa. They had gotten married the previous Saturday, 1 week after the policy went active. I sat there staring at my monitor. My office was quiet. That afternoon dead hour quiet when the phone stopped and you can hear the HVAC. I remember thinking, very clearly, that the consortium's review was going to take months and that this man had probably a few weeks. Maybe less. I didn't know his habits. I didn't know if she had already started whatever it is she does. I didn't know if there is a whatever it is she does, or if she is just the unluckiest person I've ever pulled a file on. I got his number from the policy paperwork. I called him from my cell so it wouldn't route through our system. I told myself I would keep it short and professional, just enough to plant a seed. He picked up on the second ring. Older man's voice, easy, warm, Sunbelt retiree voice. I told him who I was and what department I worked in. I told him a review was open on his wife regarding a prior claim, and I couldn't share the details, but I strongly recommended he not make any changes to his estate planning until the review closed. I said this as gently as I could. I did not say the word husband. I did not say the number 4. He was quiet for a second. Then he chuckled, not nervous, amused. "I appreciate the call," he said, "but I know what I'm doing." I asked him what he meant. There was a pause, then a different tone, lower, not scared, just thoughtful, the way somebody sounds when they're telling you something they haven't said out loud before. "She's very convincing," he said. I said his name. I asked him if he was okay. I asked if there was someone I could call for him. He said, "Have a good afternoon," and hung up. I called back twice. It went to voicemail both times. The second voicemail was full. The consortium review is still open as far as I know. I left that job at the end of the summer for reasons that were partly this and partly not. Once, in July, I looked up his name in the state death index. He wasn't in it. I don't check anymore. The Delaware Freeport isn't the kind of place you'd notice driving past. Gray building off a service road near the airport, fenced, no logo on the front. Inside, it's climate controlled to 68 degrees, humidity locked at 50%, and the vaults hold things I was told never to ask about. Paintings mostly, some sculpture, a few crates that had been sitting untouched since before I was hired. My shift ran 10 at night to 6 in the morning, Thursday through Sunday, September 2022. I'd been on the job about 4 months, and I already knew the routine cold. 2 walkthroughs per shift, 1 at midnight, 1 around 4. The rest of the time I sat in the security office watching 32 monitors and drinking bad coffee out of a Keurig somebody had donated years ago. The place had 2 kinds of zones, general storage, which I could enter with my badge, and client vaults. Those were biometric only, palm print and iris on a panel outside the door. I couldn't get in even if I wanted to, and I didn't want to. The clients who used those vaults were the kind of people who owned pieces you'd read about in the news, and the contract I signed made very clear what happened if I so much as leaned on one of those doors. That night was quiet. It was almost always quiet. Rain earlier, then nothing. I'd done my midnight walk, come back to the office, eaten half a Cuban sandwich my girlfriend had packed. I remember the parking lot log because I checked it later. No clients since Tuesday afternoon. No scheduled visits until Monday. Around 1:30, I noticed the shadow. Vault 4, client zone. I always kept an eye on those monitors, more out of habit than anything, because nothing ever moved in them. The cameras in there were on a separate feed, higher resolution, wide angle. The image was a long corridor of steel racks with crates stacked to the ceiling, and between two of the racks, near the back, something moved. At first, I thought it was a glitch. The feed hiccups sometimes, especially in weather. I tapped the monitor. Nothing changed. Then the shape moved again and I saw it clearly. A person, standing between the racks, holding what looked like a flashlight pointed down at the floor. My first thought was that a client had come in without me noticing. That's not really possible. The front gate logs every entry. The interior doors log every biometric scan. But my brain wanted an explanation that didn't involve me picking up the phone, so I gave it one. Maybe a client came in through the back loading bay. Maybe the day shift had left someone in there and forgotten to mention it. Maybe the feed was old, cached somehow. I pulled up the entry logs. Last biometric scan in Vault 4 was Tuesday at 3:47 in the afternoon. 24 gate log entries since then. All employees, all on shift, none of them me. I looked back at the monitor. He was walking now, slow, steady pace, down the corridor between the racks. He'd stop at a specific crate, kneel, do something I couldn't quite see, then stand and move to the next one, not searching. He knew exactly where he was going. He had a soft bag slung across his chest, and every few minutes he'd take something out of it or put something in. The whole thing was so calm, it took me a while to feel afraid. He wasn't sneaking. He wasn't rushed. He moved like a man doing his job. I picked up the phone and put it back down. If I called the police and it turned out to be a scheduled visit I hadn't been told about, I'd be fired that morning. The clients paid a lot of money for discretion. There had been a story going around from before my time about a guard who triggered an alarm on a foreign client and lost his job by the end of the week. So I sat there and watched. He worked for maybe 20 minutes, 6 or 7 crates, always deep in the row where you couldn't see him from the main door. Then he stood up in the middle of the corridor and looked directly at the camera. I don't mean he glanced. I mean he stopped, turned his whole body toward the lens, and held there. He was too far away for me to make out his face clearly, but I could see he wasn't wearing a mask. He was just a man in a dark jacket and a cap, looking at me. He knew where the camera was. He knew I was there. He knew, and he wanted me to know that he knew. I couldn't move. I sat with my hand on the phone and stared back. I remember thinking about the coffee getting cold next to my elbow. Stupid thing to think about. Then he raised one hand, not a wave, something slower, like he was acknowledging me. And then he walked out of frame toward the back of the vault, where the light panel was, and the whole feed went black. The other cameras in the vault went black at the same instant. He'd killed the lights from inside. I finally moved. I locked down the main entry from the security console, sealed the emergency exit override, and dialed the state police. The dispatcher asked me to repeat myself twice. I told her there was an intruder in a restricted zone, that I could not access it myself, and that I would be waiting at the front gate with the interior locked. She asked if I was going in to check. I said no. I sat in that office for the 22 minutes it took them to arrive. I didn't touch anything else. I kept watching the black monitors and thinking about how carefully he'd moved, the rhythm of it, the way he'd raised his hand. Troopers came in, more of them than I expected. They cleared the building room by room. When they finally got the biometric override from corporate and opened Vault 4, they found him sitting on a crate with his hands already resting on his knees. He'd killed the lights, but he hadn't tried to leave. He knew there was nowhere to go. He worked for the storage company, different branch, been with them 9 years. His access had been revoked 3 months earlier over some dispute I never got the details on. He'd kept a spare set of biometric templates on a device he'd built himself, which is how he got in. He'd been coming in on nights when he knew certain clients were out of the country, opening specific crates, and replacing what was inside with copies. Good copies. That was the part that took the longest to unravel. The investigators brought in specialists to match paint and canvas weave against reference samples. Pieces from that vault had already surfaced in 3 other collections under other names over the last 2 years, 2 in Europe. 1 somewhere in the Gulf. The scheme had been running longer than his access to our building. He'd had partners on the outside, buyers, someone forging documentation. My camera was the first honest record anyone had of the physical act. I got asked more than once why I didn't go in. I told them the truth. I wasn't supposed to. The rules were the rules. And when he looked at the camera, when he raised his hand like that, I understood he wasn't afraid of me. He'd counted on the guard sitting quietly and not calling anyone until morning, the way it had probably gone every other time. I still work nights. Different building now, out past Wilmington. The company sold the Freeport within a year. I don't know what happened to the paintings that were already gone. I don't think anyone does. The generator was still warm when I put my hand on it. That's the part that stuck with me, more than the equipment or the clearing itself. Someone had been there maybe 20 minutes before me, and the forest was empty in every direction I could see or hear. I was working the Sol Duc district that summer, mostly solo patrols on the trails northeast of Lake Crescent. July of 2015 was dry that year. Fire season had everyone on edge, so a lot of my job was checking for illegal campfires and unpermitted commercial activity, which usually meant somebody harvesting salal or floral greens without a permit. Small stuff. I'd been a ranger for 6 years by then, and honestly, the most exciting thing I'd ever found in the backcountry was a meth camp back in 2012, and that was mostly just a lot of empty Coleman fuel cans and a scared kid from Aberdeen. The day I want to talk about was a Tuesday. I remember because I'd stopped at the little coffee stand in Beaver on the way in, and the girl who worked Tuesdays always overfilled the cup. My route that morning was a spur trail off the main Sol Duc, one that most hikers don't bother with because it dead ends at nothing scenic. Old logging cut from the 70s, mostly regrown, plus a creek and a couple of blowdown zones. I checked that spur maybe twice a month. About an hour in, I noticed the birds were wrong. That sounds dramatic, and I don't mean it to. What I mean is, I'd been on that trail dozens of times, and there's a stretch where you always hear varied thrushes and the occasional pileated woodpecker further off. That morning there was nothing, not silent exactly. You still had the wind and the creek, just no birds working, which usually means something moved through recently. Bear, cougar, people. So I slowed down and started paying more attention to the ground. 50 yards later, I picked up a track. Boot print, size 11 or 12, deep enough that whoever made it was carrying weight. It was off trail, heading due west into the second growth. There's no reason for anyone to go that direction. No fishing, no views, and the terrain gets ugly fast once you drop off the ridge. I called it in on the radio, told dispatch I was going to follow it a couple hundred yards and check. My supervisor Randy came back and said fine, but keep him posted every 15. Standard stuff. I followed the tracks for maybe 20 minutes. Multiple sets, I realized after a while. 3, maybe 4 people, all going the same direction, all carrying something. And then the trees opened up. I want to describe this right because it's the part that still doesn't sit correctly in my head. The clearing was about the size of a basketball court, roughly oval. Every single tree that had been there was gone, and I don't mean cut down. There were no stumps, there was no sawdust. The ground where the trees had stood was smooth, packed dirt, like someone had gone over it with a rake. Whoever did this hadn't used a chainsaw. You cut a tree with a chainsaw, you get a stump, and you get a mess. This was as if the trees had been lifted out whole and the holes filled back in. In the middle of the clearing sat a Honda portable generator, the kind contractors use, the orange EU2200 model. Next to it, 3 folding tables set up in a rough triangle, empty cardboard boxes, and foam inserts stacked neatly on the ground beside them. The kind of foam that has cutouts shaped for specific instruments. I could see the outlines. Long, thin ones, some with curves, a few round ones. There was a torn packet on the ground next to one of the tables. Sterile packaging, blue and white, the kind you peel back to keep something clean until you use it. I couldn't read the label from where I was standing, but I could see the shape of the printing on it. I stood at the edge of the clearing for probably a full minute before I stepped in. I don't know why. It just felt like walking onto somebody's property. The generator was warm. I put my palm flat on the housing, and it was maybe body temperature, not hot but not cool either. The fuel cap was on. When I unscrewed it a little, I could smell gas. Full tank, or close to it. The tables were clean. That's the other thing. No dust, no fir needles, nothing. In a Pacific Northwest forest in July, you leave a flat surface out for an hour, and you get bugs and pollen and little bits of green. These tables looked like they'd been wiped down 5 minutes before I got there. I called Randy again. I kept my voice normal because I didn't want to sound like I was panicking over nothing. I told him what I was looking at. He was quiet for a couple of seconds, and then he said, "Don't touch anything else. Back out the way you came and wait at the trailhead." I asked him if we were talking about a grow operation. That was my first thought, honestly. Cartels had been running big grows in the Olympic backcountry for years by then. Everybody knew it. He said, "That's not a grow, just back out." I did what he said, mostly. I took a couple of pictures with my phone on the way out. One of the whole clearing, one of the generator, one of a foam insert with the instrument cutouts. I didn't put my hands on anything else. Halfway back to the trailhead, I stopped and listened for a long time. I don't know what I expected to hear. Whoever had been at those tables had left in a hurry, and they'd left in a direction I hadn't come from, which meant they either heard me coming or somebody warned them. There was no vehicle noise. Nothing moved in the brush, just the creek, and eventually, a raven. I walked the rest of the way out slower than I should have. Kept checking the trees on either side of the trail. I didn't see anyone. That didn't mean much. If they wanted to watch me leave, they had all the cover they needed. 2 hours later, there were 7 vehicles at the trailhead. 2 of ours, a county sheriff, and 4 unmarked SUVs with government plates. Randy was there. He introduced me to a woman in plain clothes who asked me to walk her through what I'd seen, step by step, and then she asked me the same questions again in a slightly different order. She had a small notebook, and she never wrote anything down while I was talking. She only wrote after I finished, and then she wrote for a long time. I didn't catch her agency. She never said. They kept me at the trailhead until after dark. Around 9, another ranger drove me back to the district office. Randy came in the next morning and told me the equipment had been identified. Surgical. Not veterinary, not industrial. The kind of instruments you use on a person, on a table, with lights and suction, and a hand who knows what they're doing. He said the clearing wasn't on any commercial permit, not timber, not any kind of research permit. Nobody had applied for anything within 2 miles of that spot in the last 15 years. He said the case had been handed to DEA. I asked him why DEA and not FBI. He looked at me for a second and said, because they asked for it. Then he said the trees. Whatever had been done to those trees, and however it had been done, they weren't calling it logging. They were calling it site preparation. I went back to work the following week, different district. My request. Randy signed off on it without asking why. I don't hike the Sol Duke Spur anymore. I know a couple of guys who still do. One of them told me last spring that the clearing is gone. Not overgrown, not reclaimed. Gone. Trees back in place, ground undisturbed, no sign anything was ever there. He asked me if I was sure I had the right coordinates. I checked my phone. The pictures are still there. The GPS tags match. We stop here where it's safest to stop before we break something. Thanks for making it this far without turning back. Which thread's going to echo in your mind? Tell the comments. The collection is vast, deeper than most people realize. Don't wander into the dark alone. See you next time.